Good evening, everyone. Please, can I be heard?
Good evening. Yes, you are.
Okay. We're kicking off right about now. Okay. So, once again, my name is Dr. Divine Ewim, the Deputy Director for the Nexus Research Academy, and I want to welcome everyone who has joined this early for the third class. Okay. So, um, once again, Nexus Research Academy, it's just pure research. We're here to teach people to know the foundations and basics for research so that independently they can, you know, get something out and be relevant in their field. Yeah, so once again, I want to welcome everyone to this class. Um, so we've we've moved through three classes. We've moved through two classes rather. This is the third class. Our first class was why research matters for your career, the full journey from research questions to publications. We had Our second class was how to find a feasible research question, literature search and literature searching skills, which we did learn a lot, right? And we had assignments from the previous class. Is there anyone that did his assignments? Hello, did anyone do his assignments? Yeah, so the assignment was, let me just reiterate the assignment. The assignment was to, you know, write out a focus research question, right? Then we should write out the key concepts, the keyword, and we were taught in the last class to use the Boolean operators. Then we were to use the Boolean operators to, get prompts that will help us to search out for literature reviews on Google Scholar. I don't know if anyone did that assignment, but that was the essence of the last class. If you did not do it, please try and do it and see whether you are actually learning something. Okay, so we'll be moving on to the third class. I would still introduce the speaker, but today's class we are going to be talking about study designs, case reports, case series, cross-sectional studies, case control, cohort study, all these study designs. We're going to be looking at them in depth, and we're also going to be looking at how to pick the right study design for your research. Then we're also going to be looking at protocol writing and ethics approval. And to take us on today's class is Dr. Obianuju Muoghallu. Going to be reading her profile in case you are not here in the last class. She taught us very beautifully in the last class. So Dr. Obianuju Muoghallu is a medical doctor and an early career researcher who is dedicated to making research skills accessible. Her career is marked by clinical excellence and impactful contribution to the field of medicine. She earned her medical degree from Koyut, my alma mater, in 2023, graduating with multiple distinctions, and currently practices as a physician while actively engaging in research. Dr. Obianuju serves as the Executive Director of the Nexus Research Academy and has authored 9 peer-reviewed publications in high-impact journals, and with additional work in progress and under peer review. Her commitment to research was recognized when she presented one of her papers in Nairobi, Kenya last year, earning the Research in Healthcare Excellence award at her facility. Beyond her professional pursuits, she enjoys music, good food. Come on, who does not enjoy good food? And basketball. We are excited to have her share her insights and expertise with us. So once again, I would encourage everyone to have their pen and biro, right? You can learn a lot and get a lot of knowledge that will stick with you throughout your life. Okay, so that being said, with a jamming of our hands, you can react with emojis on your meet, and let us welcome Dr. Obianuju Muoghallu. Ma, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Divine Erin, for that stellar introduction. Thank you all for being here again. I'm Dr. Obianuju Muoghallu. You were here in the last class. I'm very sure that you learned quite a lot or you refreshed what you already knew. So this class promises to be educative as well, informative. So I would advise everyone to just, pay close attention, keep an open mind. We're here to learn today. So as Dr. Divine said, he'll be projecting my slide. So I'll be teaching the different study designs, you know, how to pick the right one, and I'll also be talking about ethical approval to call writing. So, all right. Great. So we've seen the topic. I'm the executive director of the Nexus Research Academy, and I'm honored to have this class. Okay, we can move on. All right. So the objectives for this class, which I expect all of us to attain, is that by the end of the class, we're able to understand the common study designs used in research, to know when and why to use each study design, to learn how to choose the right design for a research question, and to at least grab the basics of protocol writing and ethics approval. Okay. Now, I'll just start with just giving a brief description of what a study design is. Right. So a study design is basically like a framework or an overall plan. What it does is it helps you define how data for your study will be collected. It helps you to determine who and what is going to be studied. It helps to specify what measurements you're going to take. And it also helps you to guide how to compare your variables, right? So it's a skeleton of your research work, and without it, your research cannot progress. So a good study design will determine the strength of the evidence of your study. Of course, it can affect the validity, the bias, feasibility, all these I talked about in the last class. As we've seen here, a good question with poor design leads to weak conclusions. So this design must align with your objectives and resources. You don't start building a house without a plan, right? So this acts as your plan, and yes, so we'll see as we go on in other slides. Now, let's talk about the common study designs, right? There are the descriptive studies, which is very common, and there are the under which we have the, no, let's go back. Oh yeah, under which we have the observational and the experimental. Now we're going to focus on observational designs, right? Because experimental is more technical. The descriptive study designs are generally what we at our level, what we do. Now we can go on to the next slide. So we have some common types of descriptive observational study designs. They include the case reports and case series, which I'll talk about now. There's a cross-sectional studies, there's the case control studies, and the cohort studies. So there are four major subtypes of the observational study designs: the case reports or case series, the cross-sectional studies, the case control studies, and the cohort studies. Now, going straight to the case reports and case series, what this does is this is actually one of the easiest kind of research paper to write on. What you're doing is you're making a detailed description of a single case, and usually when you are considering doing a case report, right, you are thinking of a case that is so rare or so novel that this might spark up conversation around this case. So you don't just do a case report for a normal case that everybody sees every day. You can just, for example, patient comes with, diabetes mellitus with maybe DFU, diabetic foot ulcer. This is a very common scenario we see all the time. It's not a novel case, right? Now, what could classify the novel case? A patient comes in with. I actually wrote the case report last year on a patient who came in with Fournier's gangrene and survived. Why this was novel is that patients who come in with Fournier's gangrene, there's a very high mortality. There's a high mortality rates of Fournier's gangrene. So I had to write on what happened, what did we do, how did we intervene to make this patient survive. So this was a very rare and interesting case that I wrote about. So to just give you a basic idea, it's usually for rare cases that you want to highlight, right? Now the case series, on the other hand, is more or less similar. We are talking about rare cases, but we are now describing multiple similar cases. So it's not just one person. It's not just one event we're describing. We're describing multiple cases, but similar. You're trying to identify the patterns or trends in these cases. And for both case reports and case series, there's no control group. So you're not comparing what you're studying with another group. You're just focusing on what you're studying at that point in time, right? Now we can move on. Now I highlighted the advantages, uses, and limitations of this case report and series. One of the the biggest advantage of this is that they're very simple and quick to conduct. So I said the easiest papers that you can write as someone who wants to start research is a case report or a case series. A case report is actually the easiest thing to do. It's not difficult. We're just trying to gather information from one particular case, write on the case, write on the outcome, then we can do a literature review. It is very easy and quick to conduct. And like I said, you use it for novel or rare cases, right? Rare events that happen. You don't need a lot of resources to do that. You don't need data analysis. You don't need funding, or you just need yourself to sit down and actually pull up data regarding this event. And it's actually, like I said, it's a good starting point for early researchers, right? These are the major advantages of this kind of study. But the limitation is that, of course, is usually used for rare cases, right? So you cannot use it for a case that's very common. You cannot use a case report to write something that is very common. Also, you cannot actually estimate frequency of these events with a case report or case series. You cannot, there's no comparison group to actually see, okay, what are the different events or the different outcomes between what we are studying and the control or comparison group, right? And there may be a risk of bias in case report, especially with maybe recall or something like that. So these are some of the limitations with the series. We can move on. Now, the next type of this, observational study is the cross-sectional study. What this does is you collect data at a single point in time, and you assess exposure and outcome simultaneously. So when they say these cross-sectional studies provide a snapshot of the population, it's just like you are capturing, what is happening at that point in time in a population. So it's actually very good if you're trying to measure prevalence, right? Prevalence of events, prevalence of diseases in a population. You want to know the proportion of people that have a particular characteristic at a particular point in time in a certain population. So taking a snapshot is like you are snapping the population. You're taking a screenshot at that point in time. So by doing that, you can get the information that you need. You can get multiple variables as well, at that point in time. So cross-sectional studies, there's no follow-up. Like I said, when I specify on at that point in time, it's just things that are happening at the time you're carrying out that research. So we're not doing any retrospective study, you're not doing any prospective study. And this is what is usually done when people are trying to ascertain the prevalence of events in the population, or trying to just do a general survey. All right. Can we move on? Now, the strength of a cross-sectional study is that it's not very expensive to conduct, and it can be quick sometimes, depending on your population, your sample size. Like I said, you can study multiple variables at once. So if you're trying to, okay, example, some patients at the clinic, right? You're trying to find out the comorbidities that they present with. Patients who come for a cardiology clinic, you're trying to find out their comorbidities, right? So you're doing a survey at that point in time. You can get multiple variables. You can get people that have hypertension, people that have diabetes, people that have sickle cell diseases, people that have chronic kidney diseases. So you can get multiple variables from doing just this study. And like I said, it estimates prevalence very well. So, but one of the limitations that this study does is that it cannot really determine whether one event or one variable caused another. So you cannot really ascertain the relationship between cause and effect, right? So I use this example of a population at a cardiology clinic, right? We're trying to get them comorbidities, the people with hypertension, people with diabetes, people with chronic renal diseases. Now, what a cross-sectional study cannot do is to tell you if the hypertension or the diabetes mellitus caused the chronic kidney disease. If the CKD caused the hypertension, it cannot tell you that. That is the limitation of this study. So you cannot actually use this study to find what they call temporal sequence. You cannot assess temporal sequence. So you cannot really determine the cause and effects regarding variables or events that you're studying. All right, we can move on. Okay, the next is case control studies. This is the third study I'll be talking about. I hope you're all following. If you're following, please just hit an emoji. Let me see that you're following. Okay, that's good. All right, so case control studies. What are we trying to do? Case control is more like a retrospective study. You're trying to look backward, right? So what happens in case controls is that you have your outcome already. Now, we're trying to find out what was the cause of this outcome. Do you understand what I'm saying? So you start with an outcome, and in case control studies, you have the case, you have the control group. So a control group is people without the outcome. The cases are people with the outcome. Control is people without the outcome. But you're just trying to assess if there's a relationship within the exposures that the cause and the outcome. So, like I've said, it's a looking backward study, so a retrospective study, and usually it's usually used for rare outcomes, right? Or you're trying to study multiple exposures, so you're trying to look into multiple exposures that could cause this outcome you're interested in. We're trying to look into diseases with long latency periods. So I'll give you an example. You are trying to you are doing a study on lung cancer, right? Lung cancer is the outcome. Now try to find out what were the exposures that led to the development of lung cancer. So of course you want to assess smoking exposure and other risk factors, right? So you are having the outcome of a lung cancer. Now you're looking back into these people, these participants, looking for what they may have been exposed to bring about to this outcome. Because there are other examples of case control studies. Let's give an example. You're in a class, right? Or you're assessing a class, and maybe you're trying to compare the people that failed an exam to the people that passed the exam. But what you're looking at is You're looking at the outcome now is the people who failed the exam. So that's the outcome you're interested in. Now you're looking for the exposure. What caused these people to fail the exam? You're looking at their study habits. So study habits is now the exposure, right? So the case in this scenario is people who have failed the exam. The control is people who have passed the exam. Are we following? So we are trying to assess these two groups. Do they have similar exposures to bring about these outcomes? That is basically what a case control study is. We are looking backwards. All right, let's move on. So I highlighted the strengths and limitations of case control as well. Of course, it's efficient for rare outcomes. So when you have an outcome that is not really common, it's efficient for you to look back and say, okay, what were these characters, what were they exposed to, what could have brought about this outcome. Another reason why it's advantageous is that compared to cohort studies, which I'll talk about after this, it is less expensive. Anything that's really retrospective is usually less expensive to carry out. And like I said before, you can evaluate or assess multiple exposures. So it doesn't have to be one thing. Right? You don't have to look at just one reason for the outcome. You can actually assess multiple. Okay, they were exposed to multiple of these events. So what could have caused this particular outcome that I am interested in? So one of the limitations of this study is the risk of recall bias. So recall bias basically is, the participants in this case, they may not accurately remember, what happened before. So you're having like a distortion of your results or your data, right? So this can happen. This is very frequent. This happens very frequently in case control studies. There's also, the risk of selection bias as well. When the sample size, the population that you are actually studying does not represent the population that you are supposed to study, right? So, these are things that can come up. We're trying to pick out, okay, what is the right group of people to assess their exposures regarding this outcome. Now, you're not, instead of picking the right group of people, you are picking some other groups that you think would be effective for you in gathering this data. When you should be picking from a certain group of people. I don't know if you're following. So these are some of the biases that can come up with case control studies. Also, it does not measure incidence, right? New occurrences of this event in a population does not measure that. So that's actually one other limitation of case control studies. So I can give you an example of maybe a recall bias, right? So maybe you're trying to, like I said, lung cancer, right? You're assessing these patients, the case and the controls. The people with the lung cancer, they can easily remember the drug that they used. In fact, they won't exaggerate the medications that they were given. But the people who are healthy, who don't have lung cancer, they might, not be able to recall accurately that they actually took the same medication that the other group took. So you now tend to have, invalid data and invalid results, right? So these are things that can happen in this kind of study. All right, so we can move on. So the final study I'll be talking about in this class is the cohort studies. So this is a prospective study. We're following these patients over time. It's usually a prospective study, but it can also be retrospective, right? So let me not mix that up. So it can be prospective or retrospective, but usually when you have cohort studies, it's usually prospective, right? So you're following up the patients over time. What it does is that, unlike the other case control, where you are starting with the outcome, in cohort studies, you're starting with the exposure. So you're starting from the beginning, right? So patients who have been exposed to, the topic of interest to you, you're trying to follow them up to determine what outcomes will result, right? So you are basically observing this patient or these cases, right, for the outcome. What are cohort studies used for? Usually, when you're trying to assess or evaluate multiple outcomes, so this is like an inverse of the case controls. You're trying to when case controls where you're trying to look at multiple exposures. Cohort helps you to look at multiple outcomes from that exposure that you're interested in, and it can help to establish the temporal sequence, like I explained before. Temporal sequence meaning that it can help to determine the relationship between cause and effect. So it can actually help to tell you, okay, this is the cause. What are the effects of this cause? So this is a good study if you're trying to determine cause-effect relationships in your research. So let's move on. All right. So what are the strengths and limitations of a cohort study? Like I said before, it can establish a temporal relationship, so it can help you ascertain the effects that these causes have. So basically, that means the exposure that you're interested in. What are the outcome of this exposure in the cases that you're interested in? It can also help you to measure incidence, the occurrence of new, cases in a certain population at a certain time. So it can help you ascertain incidence and risk. As I said earlier, it can help you to study multiple outcomes from that exposure that you're interested in. And the thing with cohort studies, it provides stronger evidence. If you see these major high quality studies that released, maybe in stroke or hypertension or anything, most of these studies are cohort studies. They follow up these patients. So these cohort studies provide stronger evidence, stronger scientific evidence, and results. So these cohort studies are more trusted, right? But of course, limitation is that they're very expensive. It's not easy to follow up a group of patients for you don't even know how long, for a couple of years, for decades. It's very expensive. It's time consuming. The fact that you have large sample sizes, it can be very, if not well structured, very complicated. Also, of course, you have the risk of loss of follow up, rather. So a lot of patients might, stop their regular follow-up, whatever, their follow-up meetings, or you can even, on your own end, you cannot contact this person again for so reason. So there's a risk of that loss of follow-up. And it's not very ideal for rare outcomes, right? So, how many rare outcomes can you get from following these patients up for how long? So these are the limitations that cohort studies pose. But otherwise, they provide very strong evidence, and like I said, they can help you ascertain incidence and risk, and can help you study multiple outcomes. All right, let's move on. So basically, I'm just going to reiterate what I've said before. Let's compare this study designs. I talked about the case report and case series, which I said were descriptive, exploratory. I said they were quick to do, cheap as well, not time consuming. The limitations with them was that they could not establish the relationship between cause and effects, and they were case reports and series are usually only used for rare cases, right? So you don't really use them for cases that are very common. Now, cross-sectional, I said there are very good studies to assess prevalence of events in the society, in the population, rather, that you're interested in. I talked about cross-sectional studies being like a snapshot. You're taking a screenshot of that population at that point in time. So whatever you're doing is in that screenshot. You cannot get any information outside that screenshot you're taking. You understand? So I talked about the limits of cross-sectional studies as well, that they don't establish the temporal sequence, which I explained earlier. Case control as well. Of course, for rare outcomes, can help you study multiple exposures, right? But I talk about the limitations such as the bias, recall bias, selection bias, and the rest of that. And the final cohort studies, which is very good to establish, causality. It says cause and effect. Can study multiple outcomes, has a stronger scientific evidence and backing, but time consuming, expensive, and the loss of follow up risk as well. So I just want to give a brief example, right? If we're trying to assess the prevalence of a certain behavior, let's say the prevalence of alcoholism in a population in Lagos State, what study can someone just answer quickly? What study do you think would be appropriate for that?
Cross-sectional study.
Good. That's great. A cross-sectional study is the most appropriate study to assess that. If someone says, I want to study, okay, let's say a case, right? Population who cook with firewood. They use firewood daily. I want to study this population and track any outcome from this exposure of cooking with firewood every day. What study is appropriate for that?
I use a cohort study.
Cohort studies, good. Okay, someone you want to study, let's say rabies, right? A patient survived rabies. What study is appropriate for that? Case reports. Good. So I think we're all following, right? So you need to understand that, yes, having a strong research topic is good, is key, like I mentioned in the last class. But the design is what would enhance and actually make that question work, right? So when you have a research topic, I'm sure, if you had done your assignment from the last class, by now you'd have a research topic. So looking at your research topic, you say, okay, what study is the most appropriate for this topic that I have in mind? So this would help you with that. Can we move on, please? All right. So, of course, like I said, you start with a clear research question when you're trying to pick the study design. You have to consider feasibility as well. So, do I have the time? Can I finish this study within this duration of time? Do I have access to the right data? Do I have the resources to carry out this study? Do I have the appropriate ethical approval for this study? You understand? Does my study design match my question? So these are the things that you keep in mind when you're trying to, carry out a research project. Okay. All right. Let's move on. Okay, so it's just this is just basically a summary of what I've said earlier. So when you have when you have a new or rare phenomenon, a case that's rare or new, it's preferable you do a case report. If there are multiple of that, if there are similar studies, not multiple, if there are similar studies of this rare case or this new case, you can do a case series. So what you're trying to do is just to try and find trends and patterns in these cases, right? If you're trying to estimate prevalence of a particular event or characteristic, a cross-sectional study is appropriate. If you're trying to find out rare outcomes, or trying to investigate rare outcomes rather, so lung cancer in let's say patients, this is just top of my head, right? Post-radiation patients, right, with lung cancer. So this is a rare outcome. Lung cancer is not usually usually does not usually result from patients who have undergone, X-ray, CT scans, and the rest of that. Of course, I don't think there's any I've not come across that before. It's just the top of my head, right? But lung cancer in cases like this is a rare outcome. So you want to find out what were the exposures that led to this outcome. Of course, a case control is most appropriate. And the cohort studies, you're trying to follow up patients over a period of time, which personally, if you don't have the facilities and the resources for that, I would not advise you. The reason being, cohort studies are usually funded. You need to get a grant to actually do a cohort study because these are long-term, large sample size studies, and it's not advisable for an early career researcher to undertake that task of doing a cohort study. All right, let's go. Now, I'll go over to the next topic I'm supposed to be talking on, a research protocol. So basically, you've come up with your topic, you've come up with your study design. What is next for you to do is to prepare a protocol that will be submitted for ethical approval before you can actually start to conduct your research. So depending on where you work, whether it's a government facility, whether it's a private facility, these are things that you should do. And I'm sure this will be a challenge in some private facilities because I don't know a lot of private hospitals that have facilities for research. I don't even know if there are private hospitals with ethical research boards and the rest of that, so that can pose a challenge, especially when you want to write papers on the patients we are seeing there. So this can pose a challenge, but it's something that should be brought up because all papers need ethical approval. So a research protocol is basically a plan that outlines, what will be studied, why the study is important, how the study will be conducted, who will be involved, when and where it will take place, and how you will analyze your data. So basically, you're just trying to create a roadmap for your research team, trying to ensure that there's transparency, there's consistency, there's credibility in your research work. Okay, let's move on. Now, I want us to really look at this well. If you can actually take a screenshot. We are here to help you, right? So these are the key components of a research protocol. All the protocols I've written has had all of this. You must have your title and investigators. Must be clear. Your title of your study should not be more than 25 words. Really, why are you? I don't see any reason why your research topic should be more than 25 words. What on earth are you researching, right? So it must be clear and concise. There's beauty in being concise, and it must be informative. Now, also, you must put your background and rationale, as we all know how to do. Why your study is important. It must be in your research protocol. It's the heading in your research protocol. The next heading are your research questions, which you put there, and your objectives. So I've mentioned to you how your research questions should be, how they should be specific and measurable. The next heading is your study design and methodology. So, of course, by this time you must have had the appropriate study design that you want to use. So you will include the population, the sample size, and the methods you use to collect data. Of course, you have I did not include it here, but you have your data analysis plan. So how do you intend to actually analyze this data? How do you intend to handle missing data? These are things that you'll input in your research protocol. You also want to put your ethical considerations. So if it's a case report, of course, you want to include consent, right? If not, you might want to just try and anonymize your participants. So you have to put that there that the patients or the cases who are being investigated will be anonymized, for their privacy, and the information gotten from them will be confidential. So these are things that you include in your protocol. Also, very importantly, you include the timeline. So this is the duration of time we intend to conduct our research. These are the resources that we have, and you include references as well. Your background and rationale. This is not references. I've also written protocols that included references. So references basically from The background, where you do a short, brief literature review, like I've taught you how to do. Just reference those literature review. That's it, right? It's not very complex. Okay, so let's move on. I think we just have 5 more minutes for me to round up. Of course, why ethical approval matters protects the rights and welfare of the participants, which is something that you want. It's very important that the participants are protected, and it ensures that the research you're conducting is sound scientifically. Um, Ethical approval is also important because a lot of journals, most journals, in fact, or institutions are found that require the ethical approval, and it helps to protect you from legal repercussions, right? So when you've taken the appropriate approval, lawsuits, of course, with research, lawsuits may come up. So when you have the protection that you need, you don't need to be afraid, right? Because you've gotten that approval, especially in experimental studies, right? But in descriptive studies, it's also very important that you have ethical approval. Okay, we can move on. So, some hospitals, I know of federal hospitals that have their ethical research board or institutional research board and rest of that. What do they look out for in your um, protocol? They look for scientific justification. So they would ask, is this study meaningful? Would it produce valid results? These are the things that they will look out for. They will look at the risk benefit balance. Are these risks reasonable? Would they benefit the patient? So this risk, would they outweigh the benefits in this case? If the risk outweigh the benefits, most likely approval will not be gotten. But they have to analyze if the benefits outweighs the risk for these patients. They'll also check if the patients or the people who you are involved, it doesn't have to be patients. I apologize for using patients a lot, right? I do a lot of medical research, so it's only patients that I'm always in contact with. I'm sorry about that. But people who are doing like general research is the people who are involved, right? Did they agree? Are they fully involved? Did they voluntarily agree for this research to take place? And they also look at how confidential their information is. Okay. So common ethics pitfalls. Some reasons why your research is not approved ethically. Of course, when you have poorly defined consent process, so you don't really explain the full details to these participants, so they're not aware, or the explanation is incomplete. Also, you don't really state clearly the risk involved in your research. There's no plan for confidentiality. So the data you're taking from these patients, you don't have a safe place to store them for the period of time that you're going to use them, right? And sometimes some people will even just go ahead and start a research before asking for approval, which is a red flag. So these are some of the things that may contribute to, not getting ethical approval for your patients. All right. Okay, so the key takeaways from my class today is that the study design will determine the evidence quality. So you have to pick the design that answers your research question the best. You also have to understand that every design has the strengths and limitations, which I have explained to us. You have to consider the time that you have, the resources, and ethical constraints when planning your research. And you have to understand that the protocol writing and ethical and by your research. Okay, so I don't know if there are any other slides. Okay, I'm done with the class for today. If you're still here, let me see an emoji. All right, that's great. That's great. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Obianuju, for that beautiful lecture. My mind has shifted again. It's like every class, my mind is shifting. All right, so we're going straight into questions. Please, if you do have a question, can you raise up your hand so that we can take the questions? Okay, Solomon Odima. Please, can you go ahead?
Good evening, ma. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Please, I would like to know what the difference between, because you said core studies could be prospective or retrospective. What would be the difference between a retrospective core study and a case control study? Thank you. Did you get me, ma?
Yes, you said what's the difference between a retrospective cohort study and case control study, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Um, Thank you for that question. Ask what the difference in a cohort study, a retrospective cohort study, and what?
A and a
Yes.
retrospective case control, right? Yes, case
And
control study.
and case control study.
Basically, the difference I would say is that in retrospective cohort studies, you know who was exposed, right? So you know the exposed participants of that study, people who have the exposure that you're interested in. In case control studies, you're not very sure of the exposure, but you know the outcome. Is that clear?
Please, can you repeat it again? Sorry, I didn't get you.
I said in cohort studies, right? What you are sure of, what you are aware of are the exposed participants. So, you know, I said in cohort studies, what you're interested in is the exposure, then you're following up, right? Or it could be retrospective in the sense that you're looking at past data, right? But cohort study, the basis of cohort studies is that you are aware of the exposure and the participants who are exposed. Now, with case control studies, you're not necessarily aware of the exposure, but you are aware of the outcome. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, yeah.
So that I think that's the basic difference. That's at least to the best of my knowledge, that's the basic difference between.
Okay, thank you very much, man. We have limited time, so let's try to speed up. Vivian Awoke, can you go on?
All right, good evening. Thank you very much, Dr. Ju, for the lecture. Mine is not a question on this topic, so to say, but I want to ask. Someone like me was unfortunately unable to join the two previous lectures. I'm asking if the lectures were recorded. Is there any place where, if it was recorded, is there any place where I can have a record of
Okay,
it
okay, so I'll answer
for
that.
my reference?
If you've been following, I sent mails from the last class. We have our YouTube video, YouTube channel. You can check it out and you will see the recordings from the last class. Okay, so Victor Nweze, can you go on?
Okay, thank you very much for the lecture once again. So I'll just make my questions just real quick. So the first question is, considering the fact that the cohort study itself is it's kind of experimental in my expectation. Will you consider, like, based on the fact that in cohort studies you get kind of multiple outcomes, which of course the multiple outcomes are kind of unexpected, would you regard cohort study more of an experimental study, like the way you consider primary research? That's my first question.
Dr. Obianuju, did you get the question?
Yes, I did. So the key difference between a descriptive study and experimental study is that there's no intervention in the descriptive study. Do you understand? So a cohort study is not an experimental study because you did not intervene. Yes, of course, there could be multiple outcomes, but you are not influencing those outcomes. You're not giving medication. You're not giving any kind of intervention. You're just observing. You're observing the exposure develop into the outcome. So it is not an experimental study, but they are quite similar. I think that's the major difference is that there's no intervention.
Okay, so it's more like, what if in a case where you have to maybe, of course, maybe you're treating the patient, just like, I don't want to, let's bring in the similitude of kind of a clinical trial here, and you're bringing in this case and you're just trying to observe the patient in that case. Would you consider that also a cohort study or somewhat like experimental? because in a way you're not influencing the outcome, but the outcome you're just trying to observe what is being expressed by the patient.
So I wanted to understand what you mean by that. The treatment you're giving to the patient, are you trying to determine the outcome of that treatment? Or are you trying to observe a patient who have been taking this treatment for the outcome? Are you the one giving the patient
Okay,
this
so
treatment?
yeah, so we're just trying to just exactly like the patient came up with a case that's been presented, and of course it's a rare case, but you're just observing the patient both on both sides, either treated or non-treated.
I think
Because
I'm
what I'm kind of curious about this is the fact that the outcome is kind of new, or is something that you don't expect it to happen, right? And you kind of reporting this case, the outcome. So I'm kind of seeing it as more like experimental, because you rightly mentioned that it's kind of similar to experimental, but you're not intervening in the case.
exactly. You're not intervening. That's
Yeah.
the key difference. Yes.
Okay, so my second question just go as thus. I'll be very quick with time. So of course in the case control, you mentioned that it's of course their biasness, and I did understand the key definition of from what you presented, but I'm also kind of concerned about the bias in the sense that for the case of, you mentioned the case of lung cancer, and I'm just thinking of something to compare, maybe like someone that takes this e-cigarette, for instance, and you did a, well, I say, a population examination or surveys or something like that, or a questionnaire, and after doing that, based on statistical significance, they can only see an association based on that. But my concern is association is more like linking, and don't you think that there's kind of a biasness in that, because something may be associated with something but does not necessarily cause it, based on evidence-based molecular medicine? Yep.
Okay, I understand what you say. You could find some associations, but not necessarily what is causing that outcome, right? Is that what you're asking?
Exactly.
Yes, that can happen in research. It's a common occurrence in research. It doesn't really, there's no, what I say, there's no remedy to that. These things happen. What research is just trying to do is to try to give answers, any kind of answers it can give to, to the question that you're asking. Doesn't necessarily exclude that it could give false positives in the example that you mentioned, but that's the essence of research, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. So just finally, and the last one is the case of, you mentioned in ethical approval. Of course, maybe some private hospitals, yeah, as we have it, may not have the case of, say, an ethical committee or a board. What do you think about maybe for example, a private hospital that want to carry out a case study or case report, and they want to collaborate, to say, with a teaching hospital or a college of medicine that has this kind of board? Could such collaboration with a board, or sorry, with an institute, say a teaching hospital that has such ethical board, could that help facilitate such ethical approval of a case report taken in a private hospital that does not have such ethical board? What do you think about that, please?
The
Thank
thing
you.
is, this question is actually beyond my scope because I don't own a private hospital and I do not understand all those, you know, the jargon and everything about that. But I work in a private hospital that has an ethical board, so I believe it's possible for private hospitals to develop their own ethical board if they are that interested in research.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Doctor, on the comments asked, please, does systematic review fall under case series? Does systematic review fall under case series?
Systematic reviews are quite different from case series. I wouldn't say they fall under case series. I mean, they have similarities in the sense that you're trying to figure out similar occurrences and try to identify patterns between them. But I don't think you would classify them as the same in this sense. They are under a different class entirely.
Okay. Please, does any other person have any other question? If not, we'll be drawing the curtain at this point. Okay, no questions. Okay, so I want to use this opportunity to thank everyone once again for joining this class. It was a very educative and insightful one, right? For everyone, it was very insightful. And I want to encourage every one of us that have been consistent to keep on trying. There are 9 classes. We are in class 3, right? So we are almost done. And at the end, trust me, you will be more wiser than where we picked you up from. Okay, that being said, thank you once again to everyone. We also want to thank our speaker who did a great job again. It's not easy for somebody to know something this deep and answer these very deep questions. So we truly appreciate you, Ma. Yeah. Okay. That being said, thank you once again, everyone. Happy Sunday in advance. All right. Good night.